Women's rights in Afghanistan have been severely restricted since the Taliban took control of the country less than 18 months ago. Just this weekend, it's been confirmed that the Ministry of Higher Education has ordered private universities not to allow female students to sit entrance exams next month. Women are barred from public places such as parks and gyms in many parts of the country, while some aid agencies have pulled out of Afghanistan after the Taliban banned females from working for non-governmental organisations. Peymana Assad was born in Afghanistan but left the country when she was 3 years old and entered the UK as a refugee. She's now a Labour councillor and she joins me now. Thank you very much for joining me today. Now, you were in Kabul at the time that the Taliban seized control again, and you are still in contact with a lot of people in Afghanistan. Can you give us some sense of what is happening to women there now?
Yeah, so I was in Afghanistan when the Taliban came in, and I think a lot of people weren't expecting it to be so quick.
Yes.
But because of that Doha deal that the United States signed with the Taliban, a lot of the contractors who were helping the Afghan army pulled out. And so the morale of the Afghan army was also reduced because 5,000 Taliban prisoners were released back into the battlefield against the Afghan government. And so what you saw happen on the 15th of August 2021 was basically a rapid set of events. And right now, as you've mentioned, women aren't allowed to go to university, they're not allowed to work, they're not allowed to go to parks, they're not allowed to actually leave their home without a male chaperone.
And at the time, we were told, well, this is the new Taliban. They've changed their ways. They won't be so oppressive towards women. That was never convincing, was it? No,
I said right from the start, we shouldn't trust them and we shouldn't believe what they say, because this is just a PR stunt. They're trying to get recognition from the Western world. And Amina Mohammed, the UN's top woman, she actually went to the Taliban recently to try and convince them to allow women to work in aid agencies because of the humanitarian situation. And what she said was that they really want recognition, and they basically want to do a negotiation on recognition for allowing women to have their freedoms and fundamental rights.
What could be done in terms of tackling this issue? Is it a question of the Western powers getting together and trying to put pressure on Taliban? Is it perhaps Islamic states? Could they play a part in this?
So I think it's a bit of both. I think that sometimes we underestimate how much power we have as the UK in general. I think I'm a co-signatory to a letter to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak asking him to host a global summit on the situation with Afghan women and girls. One, to create a safe asylum route for those who are at risk, and two, to make sure that Afghan women are involved in any future negotiations with the Taliban, because that's where really the Taliban can be held to account. But also Islamic countries, specifically Arab countries, the UAE, Qatar, Jordan, these other countries who have Muslim majority populations, they can actually stand up and say what the Taliban is doing is not Islamic, because other Muslim countries allow women to go to university, they allow them to work, and they allow them to drive. You know, Saudi Arabia just lifted the ban on women not being able to drive. So what they're doing is un-Islamic, in essence.
Is that part of the problem? There's a perception issue that people think, well, because there are human rights abuses against women in other Arabic countries, that maybe the Taliban are just the norm when it comes to these kind of things.
Yeah, I think there is a narrative that this is an Islamic way of life, but it actually isn't. If you look at Afghanistan in the 1950s, 1960s, what you see is a completely different type of country. You know, women walked in miniskirts and they had the freedom to choose what they wore outside. They worked, they studied, they travelled freely. This move towards extremism has come because of war, and I think that people fail to understand that.
And Peymana, you've been speaking to women in Afghanistan recently. Have you any particular responses from them at the moment, or any examples that you could give?
Yeah, so the day that the Taliban banned girls from university, I had dozens of Afghan girls from the south reach out to me and basically beg, can we come to universities abroad? Are there any opportunities for us? And the difficulty is that medical students study in English, so they can apply for scholarships or opportunities abroad, but other students who are studying other subjects can't because they study in their own native languages. So it's very, very difficult. There have been opportunities that people have created, universities around the world, but the Taliban have put a restriction: no Afghan woman or girl is allowed to leave the country without a male family member.
What about the men of Afghanistan? Are they not concerned about the way in which the Taliban are imposing these things on women?
So since the 15th of August 2021, Afghan men and boys have actually been protesting on the streets alongside Afghan women for their rights. They've mainly been kidnapped, tortured, imprisoned, to end up dead on the street if they do take part in such activities. The day that Afghan women were banned from university, what you saw in the East province was Afghan boys refused to go to university and actually held a protest outside of their university, saying if you don't let all of us go in, then we won't go and study either. You had more than 100 university professors, all Afghan men, resign from their positions at Kabul University in solidarity with Afghan women. But I have to say that Afghan men and boys are under attack from the Taliban too, because anybody standing up for the rights of Afghan women and girls are being tortured, killed and disappeared.
Well, that's the problem, because the kind of tactics you're outlining there, I mean, it's intimidating, it's scary, and it's resulting in death. So, how can this change when you have such an authoritarian body of people in charge, and even these kind of protests that you describe aren't really having the desired effect?
Well, the responsibility lies with President Biden and the United States government. They're the ones who sat down and actually signed this agreement with the Taliban that brought them into power. It was basically a surrender deal with the Taliban. The United States government needs to do more. They have power over the Taliban. They've stopped the $40 million a week that are going to Afghanistan that was supposed to help with the humanitarian situation. And I think that there are these types of leverages, isolation from the world, making sure that you sanction the Taliban leaders so they can't travel abroad. Right now, what you see is Taliban leaders living in Qatar, living in Pakistan. Their daughters are going to schools in these countries. They have families in these countries. Yes. Even one of the Taliban leaders' daughters is playing football in Qatar. So imagine,
total hypocrisy.
It's complete hypocrisy. So this is what I mean. Like when we say you have power, you can leverage this. You can tell them you can't be living in this country and then enacting a different law in that country. And a lot of Afghans say that these people aren't actually from Afghanistan. They've lived their entire lives in Pakistan. They've studied in madrasas in Pakistan. And now they're enforcing these strict Islamic laws that are alien to Afghan people in Afghanistan.
Did no one flag this to Biden's administration in advance? Did no one say, look, this will have a serious effect on women's rights?
Where do you want me to start? I think a lot of Afghans kept telling the Biden administration, you're making a huge mistake by not including the Afghan government. They excluded the Afghans from negotiations with the Taliban. So you see the deal that Ambassador Khalilzad, the US ambassador at the time, signed with the Taliban. They first signed that deal and then opened up direct negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban. What they should have done is what Afghans were asking for, is stand firm with us and say to the Taliban, no, you will sit down with the Afghan government. This is a democratically elected government and you will do a direct negotiation with them. They didn't. They caved.
Are the Taliban open to negotiations?
I think that a lot of people say on the ground that there are, individuals who are moderates and that are open to having these discussions and negotiations, because many of them, as you know, they are sending their own daughters to schools. I had a meeting with a former foreign minister of the Taliban regime in Kabul a few years ago, and he had opened up a girls' school. So there are people who believe in the rights of women and girls, but they believe it in a framework under Islamic laws.
Right.
With hijab and segregation and all of this. And I think that if that's the compromise, then let's do that, as long as women and girls have their freedom.
I mean, we've seen in Iran, of course, lots of protests and women burning their veils and dancing in the street, these sort of incredible bravery, because there's serious risk in doing those kind of things. Is it that kind of grassroots activism, people, just courage from the people who are under these oppressive regimes? Is that how this is going to end?
Yeah, I think that whatever change comes, it has to come from the ground up. But, a lot of people are losing their lives. And with a country currently, today 160 people died in Afghanistan because of the cold, harsh winter. And the humanitarian aid isn't reaching the right people because the Taliban are engaging in corruption and taking this aid for themselves and their own families. I think that this is what we're going to see, these people taking huge risks to their own lives and of their families to try and bring change to their country.